This episode has been brought to you in part by the Azrieli Music Prizes. Join them in celebrating artistic excellence at the AMP Gala Concert, live from Maison Symphonique in Montreal, happening October 20th at 7:30 p.m. Eastern. Orchestre Metropolitain will premiere award-winning music by laureates Aharon Harla, Iman Habibi, and Rita Ueda. Learn more at azrielifoundation.org/AMP.
I could use tools, but I'd rather take a fragile approach.
Do what you gotta do.
That's what it sounded like this week at Montreal's Shaar Hashomayim Synagogue, as workers carefully chiseled a metal cylinder containing a time capsule out of a cornerstone of the building where it had been placed 100 years ago. That's when the congregation's new home was being built on its current spot in Westmount, a Tony, mostly Anglo neighborhood at the time where the Shaar has stood for a century. And this weekend, the Shaar marked the 100th anniversary of being on the site. They held a ceremony and they rededicated the main sanctuary in honor of one of their longest-serving rabbis, Wilfred Shushat, who was hired right after the Second World War and died in 2018. Historically, the Shaar has been home to some of the most influential leaders and families in Canada's Jewish community, especially in the days when Montreal was the center of Jewish life in this country. You'll have heard of names like the Bronfmans and the Jacobses and the Cohens, and even in more recent times, the late poet and singer Leonard Cohen. The Shaar is actually older than Canada. It was formed in 1846.
Being surrounded by so much history in this building, and that's so tied in so many ways to the history of Jewish Montreal and Jewish Canada. It's really humbling.
I'm Ellen Besner, and this is what Jewish Canada sounds like for Monday, September the 19th, 2022. Welcome to the CJN Daily, a podcast of the Canadian Jewish News, sponsored by Metropia. And so what was in that long-forgotten time capsule from 1922, placed there by members who had just finished sending their sons to fight in the First World War and had survived the Spanish flu, but long before the Holocaust and long before the State of Israel was founded? They likely could not have imagined the changes in the world in the intervening 100 years when their time capsule was discovered. The Shaar's archivist, Srour-Zackon, watched as it came out, and then, wearing special gloves, she discovered when she opened it that there was water damage. So, because a lot of what's inside is still wet, they decided to leave most of it be until it dries, but they did find some newspapers of the day, some coins from 1920 and 1921, and she could see some letters and some parchment, but she won't take it out until it's safe. Srour-Zackon joins us now with a look at the history of the Shaar and its place in Canadian Jewish life. First of all, why don't you just tell us a little bit about what is the ceremony going to look like? What are they doing?
Sure. So a bit of background. We moved into this building exactly on September 17th, 1922, and it'll be a quasi-recreation of the ceremony of dedication, which we did 100 years ago. And at that time, what they did was a procession of the Torahs from our previous building into this building. And how we'll be marking that is having leaders of the congregation, our clergy, etc., doing a procession, carrying those Torahs down to the front where they will be decorated and crowned, and there'll be also a beautiful service accompanied by our chazan, which is Cantor Gideon Zellermeyer, as well as our choir, who will be singing selections of our musical compositions from across the years, including some original compositions for the occasion, and be a kickoff for God willing, our next 100 years. And of course, the most important thing to mention is that we will be rededicating the sanctuary in honor of Rabbi Dr. Wilfred Shushat, who served our congregation from 1946, I believe, was when he was first hired as assistant rabbi until his retirement in 93. And then he continued with us as emeritus until 2018. So he was the rabbi who was with us for most of the past 100 years when we were in this building.
in terms of some of the most famous or well-known people or important people that were members or associated with the congregation. So maybe you can give us some of the names of, they are celebrities in Jewish history, are they not?
Well, of course, the first one that always comes to mind for everyone is Leonard Cohen, who did in fact grow up in the synagogue. His grandfather and his great-grandfather, as well as one of his uncles, all served as presidents of this congregation. Most notably, his grandfather, Lion Cohen, the longest serving president. He was also a leader extraordinaire throughout the Jewish community. He was the founder of one of the first English Jewish papers. He was a founder of the Jewish General Hospital, the United Talmud Torahs, and was a real community builder. He was the very first president of Canadian Jewish Congress. So Lion Cohen is one of the real giants from here. And there's so many people I could list off. Sam W. Jacobs, who was a member of parliament, and a very strong advocate for the Jewish community. One thing he notably did was in 1910, he launched a lawsuit against J.E. Plamondon, who had for a blood libel case, which is an interesting bit of history of anti-Semitism in Canada. And there's so many people. In terms of Israeli dignitaries, Chaim Herzog visited here some years ago. Many years ago, about 100 years ago, Chaim Weizmann came here and he had dinner with our rabbi then, who is Rabbi Dr. Herman Abramovitz. We've had some great thinkers, Jewish thinkers pass through our doors, including Abraham Heschel came here. And one of my favorite pieces of trivia is that Solomon Schechter visited here.
But it also speaks to the fact that it is the oldest Ashkenazi synagogue in Canada. Yes. The Spanish and Portuguese, of course, was the first one for the Sephardi community. Where did this synagogue founders come from? What are their origins?
Sure. So the synagogue was founded in 1846, actually as a breakaway congregation from the Spanish and Portuguese, which at the time was the only synagogue. And this was founded by Jews of English, German, and Polish background who were seeking to pray according to their own tradition. So they formed their own congregation, which was in fact initially called the English, German, and Polish Congregation, original title. They were seeking to actually pray in the Ashkenazi tradition. They, for the first years, were in a building on St. Constance Street, and they continued to build, ended up on McGill College in 1885, which was our home for a good part of 35 years. And then we moved into this building where we currently are in 1922. And here's a little interesting bit of history. They had the synagogue founders had, when they were looking to move to a new building from the McGill College location, prior to World War I, had actually purchased a plot of land, which they had to sell for financial reasons following the war. But that plot of land later became the site of the Montreal Forum, where the Habs played for many, many years. So in another timeline, that could have been the home for the synagogue.
Also, architecturally, the building itself has some very important historic heritage features. Maybe you can talk about some of them, including the cornerstone that you're researching now.
So this building, interestingly enough, our synagogue building is physically the biggest synagogue in Canada. And at the time of its construction, it was considered one of the most beautiful synagogue buildings in Canada. And it was a real attraction for people to come visit. And one of the very first important people who came to see the synagogue was Rav Kook from Israel. He came to visit the synagogue in 1924, and there's a wonderful story of him giving a halachic ruling that still holds to today regarding our bima, which if people haven't seen the sanctuary, our bima is centered at the front, which at the time was architecturally unusual for synagogues. Synagogues would have been more a bima in the center, and with the congregation kind of around, or women sitting in a balcony. And so they had asked him, what should we, is there a way that we can set up our bima so it's, more halachic, because some people weren't comfortable with it. And he said that if you have a minyan on there all the time, it becomes like its own sanctuary. in the meantime, this building has been expanded multiple times since 22. We were expanded in 1948. We were significantly expanded in 1967. And then there has been some further work since. And in the course of those expansions, we have left a trail of time capsules in cornerstones. And this whole saga began this past summer when, during the course of construction on the front plaza of our building, the construction crew accidentally dislodged the time capsule that was inside the 1967 cornerstone. We pulled it out, we went through, and it was pretty remarkable. It had a lot of materials relating to the Six-Day War, to Expo 67, to Canada's centennial. There was letters from the president and the rabbi to the future leaders of the congregation. And that kind of sent us on a wild goose chase to say, well, if there is a time capsule in this stone, what about our other stones? So at this point, we have been able to establish with documentary evidence that we have a time capsule in our 1948 cornerstone, which we'll not be extracting at this time. But we have gone through a process to establish if there is, in fact, a time capsule from 1922.
So speaking of this, are you guys doing a time capsule for the 100th or some kind of thing you're putting together for the future Martians that come and find us?
I can say that we are. We are in the midst of bringing together materials to place another time capsule. And so far, materials that we have gathered include the newspapers announcing Queen Elizabeth II's death, because that's a major event that has coincided. And we're anticipating to include letters from all of our clergy and our president. And we also find it important to include material from the youth of the synagogue, from the children too, so we get that perspective. I found that was one thing missing from the 1967 is you never get the youth perspective. And I think we're having some conversations now about what do we feel is important of an image of, captured in time of ourselves for whatever Jewish community and congregation looks like 100 years from now, what we would want them to know of us.
If you are the dealer, I'm out of the game. If you are the healer, means...
For people who don't know the building, they do know about the fact that Leonard Cohen and Gideon Zellermeyer, Cantor Zellermeyer, made an album that won an Emmy, or Grammy, I should say, and that has put, the synagogue on the map from the wider population, not just the Jewish population. But how important has this music been in the history of the synagogue?
We have a very strong musical tradition dating back a long time. We've always had some pretty remarkable cantors here, and of course Gideon Zellermeyer is a remarkable cantor. We have a history of original compositions. We had a music director that was here with us for 25 years. His name was Stephen Glass, and we use a lot of his original compositions till this day. And we even, I hear in conversations with people from other synagogues using the compositions that have been composed for our congregation. But we do have a very, very strong and an old musical tradition. We have a choir still, and the choir still features importantly as part of our weekly services. And what's especially nice here is our high holiday services are pretty remarkable from a musical standpoint. They're always really, really beautiful and very moving to listen to.
What's your favorite part yourself of the building?
What is my favorite part? That's a hard question. There's so much. I think I have more favorite items and favorite papers than I do have favorite locations.
Okay, tell me your favorite item so far, one of your top 10.
I'll tell you two of my favorites. First one was one early paper I found, which was the synagogue's air raid protocol from World War II, which essentially boiled down to that, well, if they bomb us, we can't do anything. There's nowhere to hide. Another really interesting one that I came across recently was a seating plan for the memorial service that we held here in 1976 for following the Munich massacre. It was one of the very first public memorial services held. It was held 1 week before the Montreal Olympics opened. And the reason we held it here in collaboration with the rest of the Jewish community was because, of course, the Olympics Committee refused to hold a minute or moment of silence for the Israeli athletes who had been murdered in the Olympics in Munich. So we held a service here, which was attended by 2,000 people, I believe, including the Israeli delegation of athletes, relative of people, of those who were murdered or survived the Munich massacres. And we had the seating plan from that, which I found really, really striking. And also in some ways moving that we held the service here, and quite sad that the Olympics obviously took them years and years, wouldn't have done this themselves, and it had to come from within the Jewish community.
And that's what Jewish Canada sounds like for this episode of the CJN Daily, a podcast of the Canadian Jewish News, sponsored by Metropia. Integrity, community, quality, and customer care. Today's listener shout-out goes to Rick Goodman in Toronto. He's the son of a Canadian World War II Navy veteran. And we'll end the show with this excerpt from the ceremony and concert Saturday night at the Shaar. Here is the Akiva Youth Choir and their rendition of L'Dor Vador. Special thanks to Hannah for all the music and the photos.